We have a lot to cover in today's video. We had 6 exhibition games on the schedule last night. We have a Bruins signing to discuss, plus we have some offseason rumblings concerning teams like the Buffalo Sabres, New York Islanders, and the Edmonton Oilers. We'll jump into all the latest coming up next. So welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. Now, as I mentioned, we have a lot to cover today. Let's kick things off with last night's exhibition games. It was a very busy day in the NHL with 6 games taking place throughout the entire day from early afternoon all the way to late last night. So lots of hockey to talk about. So let's take a look at the results from last night's games. We saw the Tampa Bay Lightning defeat the Florida Panthers by a 5-0 score. It was not a good outing for Sergei Bobrovsky. The Panthers didn't look overly strong, and the Lightning were actually without a couple of their top guys, with Stamkos and Hedman not in the lineup. Guys like Point and Kucherov looked really solid. So overall, Tampa looked really good. Florida, on the other hand, not so much. So we'll have to see how they can respond here when they get ready to take on the Islanders in their play-in series, but not a good start for the Florida Panthers. We had a couple of 3-2 games as well, including the Colorado Avalanche and Minnesota Wild. Nathan MacKinnon and his line mates looked really solid for the Avalanche, but it was a closer game. Certainly Minnesota put up a pretty good fight, a 3-2 win there. We also saw a 3-2 game with the Washington Capitals and Carolina Hurricanes, with Alexander Ovechkin scoring a couple goals, showing again that he was not really having any rust. He hasn't lost his touch. Things are still going strong. Both teams had a decent game from what I saw of it. I only saw bits and pieces though. But overall, I think Washington is going to be a team to watch out for in these playoffs. They look like they're ready to go. In Carolina, with one of the stronger blue lines, if they can get some really solid goaltending, they can potentially do some damage as well, but I think they'll be in tight against the Rangers in their play-in series. The Chicago Blackhawks upset the St. Louis Blues with a 4-0 shutout. Corey Crawford and Malcolm Subban shared the honor, where Blues goalies Jordan Binnington and Jake Allen both saw some action, and they both allowed 2 goals. So certainly not a great game for the defending Stanley Cup champions, but a really solid affair for the Chicago Blackhawks. Kubalik scored a couple of nice goals as well. So overall, a really solid outing for the Hawks. Dylan Strome also got on the score sheet too. So not a good start for the Stanley Cup champions, but again, it's just an exhibition game. A lot of players getting their legs underneath them and certainly getting their rust worn off. So we'll see how some of these teams are impacted. In the case of the Blues, even though it wasn't a great game for them, they certainly have the round robin tournament for the top 4 seedings to kind of get more of their structure in place here and going stronger before their official playoff series gets underway in the first round, once we get to the round of 16 here. We had a battle of New York with the Islanders edging the Rangers, a 2-1 score. Barry Trotsch's defensive systems were certainly in full effect last night against the Rangers. The Islanders played a really solid defensive game, had some good goaltending. The Rangers overall didn't have a bad game, but had a hard time getting through and getting the opportunities. Obviously, like I said, Islanders and Rangers goaltending were both pretty decent. Shesterkin and Lundqvist both shared the net for the New York Rangers, who Anthony Beauvillier and Devin Taves scored for the Islanders in the victory. Then the final game of the night saw the Winnipeg Jets doing battle with the Vancouver Canucks, with the Jets pulling out a 4-1 victory. I know there were certainly some question marks from the Canucks fans on the lineup of the Canucks going in, with Jake Virtanen not being in the lineup. There's already swelled a lot of talk already about, is he done in Vancouver? Will he be traded? He's a pending RFA. Certainly some people thought he might have lost his spot, but at the same time, I think fair to say that it's just an exhibition game, but that is cause for concern, I think, if you're Virtanen or a fan of his, for sure. I think based on comments from Jim Benning and coach Travis Green, Green basically said that he put together the lineup he felt gave his team the best chance to win. So Zach McEwen got in the lineup, whereas Virtanen is the one who sat out, which was something that was speculated about based on Canucks scrimmages and practices leading into this phase of the NHL return to play. So that could be bad news for Virtanen, but at the same time, I saw a lot of talk on social media from Canuck fans today. We saw some interviews on different radio programs as well, and I do think that it is possible that Virtanen could be moved, but I think it's premature to kind of jump to that conclusion at this point. Obviously, there's still an opportunity that he can get back into the lineup, and if the Canucks do some damage in the playoffs, and many feel that they're certainly capable of possibly doing that, then that very well could, create a hole at some point. You never know what can happen. He can get in there and kind of reprove himself and get back in everybody's good graces. But for right now, it seems apparent that he might not be in the lineup to start their series against the Minnesota Wild. But at the same time, not sure that Zach McEwen really had such an awesome game that there's no chance he goes back in. I think McEwen was okay, but didn't see anything too crazy great that made me think for sure that it's a slam dunk that he plays versus the Wild instead of Virtanen. But we had talked about Virtanen being a potential trade target before a few weeks back. Obviously, the Canucks, like many teams, are going to be really tight up against the cap, have some really hard decisions to make. They have some really unfavorable contracts that they'd love to move, including like Louis Eriksson, for example, prime target. And they're going to have to include some sweeteners. And maybe a team would look upon Jake Virtanen as being a said sweetener in that package. He's still young enough, physical winger who could still have that 20 to 30 goal potential. He's still young enough that could still be realized. Hard to say. It also depends on what opportunities he's given, where he's playing, who he's playing with, etc. So let me know your thoughts on the Virtanen scratch from the lineup, especially if you're a Canucks fan. What does this imply for his long-term future, or is it really too premature to make any judgments in that regard? Now, as I mentioned as well, we also have a Bruins signing. They've signed winger Anders Bjork to a 3-year extension at $1.6 million average annual value. Of course, Bjork's been in the Bruins lineup for the past 3 years, where he's spent kind of up and down between the Bruins and their AHL affiliate. More in the NHL than the AHL, but still some time in the minors each of the past 3 seasons. When he's been in the minors, he's been a really solid performer. The NHL, he's kind of still building his way up. But obviously, he's a player that the Bruins believe in and sees being a part of their immediate future here with this contract. He did play 58 NHL games last year and put up 19 points. And as we discussed in our Seattle Kraken expansion draft video, he could possibly even end up being a target of the Seattle team. I think based on the rules for protecting players, it is, certainly have some doubt that he would be on that protected list. He might be available. And with this decent contract, if he can have himself a decent year coming up in the 2021 season, he could be a potential target for them. Now, we also had a quick report as well on a couple of NHL veteran guys who have been around up and down between the AHL and the NHL in the last number of years, heading over to play in Europe since they did not make their team's roster to go into Phase 4 here, the return to play and be in the bubble lineup. Corey Conacher of the Tampa Bay Lightning, who's been around the NHL for quite a few years now, has had a couple of stints in Tampa, has also been in Ottawa and Buffalo as well. Has played in Europe before. He did a year in the Swiss League, and that's where he's heading to go back to, except this time with a different team. He's signing a 3-year contract, so he likely is going to remain over in Europe, more likely until he's finished up, would be my guess. And we also saw Brian Gibbons, who's bounced around the NHL a little bit as well. Currently, the Hurricanes organization was not included in their roster to go to the NHL bubble site here, so he is signing to go to the Swiss League as well. So a couple of NHL veterans won't be making the return when next season rolls around. Now, as I mentioned as well, we have some offseason rumblings to take a look at. Let's kick things off with the New York Islanders. There's reports here from Arthur Staple talking about how the Islanders need to shed salary, like many NHL teams around the league, but one of their big offseason moves is going to have to be to sign Matthew Barzal, who's going to be looking for a long-term big money contract. There's a lot of debate that his new contract could be one of the first contracts, if not the contract, this offseason to kind of set the tone for the new landscape, the new marketplace of the NHL for free agents, since he's one of the top young players who needs to be signed coming into the 2021 NHL season here. So depending on how much cap room that takes up, they likely do need to shed some salary elsewhere. And Staple feels that their top most likely player to do that would be defenseman Nick Leddy, who still has 2 years left, making over $5 million. And the reason he chose Leddy, I think, is just because he'd have a little bit more of a trade value than, for example, than a guy like a Johnny Boychuk or an Andrew Ladd. Obviously, Boychuk and Ladd's contracts, you could say, probably a little less favorable, and they probably would prefer to move them out, but they might have to include some sweeteners. I could see Johnny Boychuk maybe being moved because he's also got 2 years left at $6 million. If they did a 40-50% salary retention and sent him off to one of the teams that aren't in this 2014 return, like in Ottawa, Detroit, something to that effect, where he could be a veteran guy, mentor some of their younger defensemen on a lesser cap hit for them, that could make sense, and they might take that on without too much more being included from the Islander side of things. At the same time, like an Andrew Ladd, there was some talk before about an Andrew Ladd Zach Parise swap, but that never worked out. And with the market the way it is now, I wouldn't be surprised if they revisit it, but I think it's going to be even tougher to get that deal done because of the tight salary cap situation the Islanders and the Wild are both going to find themselves in. That won't be an easy deal to do, but Leddy still has enough value, though, that they could probably get away without including anything else with that and find a taker to shed the salary. Not that they necessarily want to move him, but obviously, it's a contract that's likely going to be necessary if they can find a way to do it. Obviously, they have some other defensemen like Pelech and Pulock and Taves that are all going to be looking for raises here soon enough as well. I also saw a report from the same Arthur Staple article talking about defenseman Sebastian Aho. Now, Aho, of course, who sometimes gets confused for the other Sebastian Aho who plays for the Carolina Hurricanes, defenseman for the Islanders, very well could be heading to play in Sweden for the next few years, so he may not be a part of the Islanders' future after all. Next up, let's look at the Sabres, and I want to look at another John Vogel article from The Athletic talking about some moves that he feels the Sabres will make this year. Obviously, it's a mailbag type article, so he's handing a lot of questions from Sabres fans. One of the ones was what to do with Jeff Skinner, because clearly that Skinner contract looks bad right now. He had a tremendous year, scored 40 goals, got a big-time deal making $9 million, and last year things fell off. But if you look at who he played with a lot, he didn't get enough opportunity to play with Jack Eichel. I think after signing a $9 million contract, I think they kind of felt Skinner should be more capable of kind of being the driving force on the line to help more offense be created. I honestly don't think that's a realistic expectation. I think Skinner needs a really top center to play with, so I think they need to put him back with Eichel, or they really need to find a number 2 center. Now, of course, the Sabres finding that number 2 center has been a topic that we've talked about quite a bit. Obviously, they had hoped that was going to be Casey Middlestat, but by now that's not worked out. It could turn out to be Dylan Cousins, but I'm not sure that they're going to want to push him into too far up the lineup right away and potentially hurt his growth and development here. They might want to start him off slower, maybe even start him on the wing. So I think Sabres finding a number 2 center iceman this offseason will be a fairly high priority. They do have numerous other issues to talk about and address here, but as I mentioned before, Kevin Adams, the new GM, is going to have a lot of flexibility because there's a lot of contracts that are either expiring due to being UFA or RFA, and they really can shed themselves of a lot of players without too much trouble if they really wanted to kind of start fresh with a lot of other guys here. So we'll see what they do, but finding a number 2 center is going to be a big priority for them, and they might be able to do that by trading a defenseman like Brandon Montour. Now, he's asked about Montour in this article, and he really feels that given the number of defensemen in the Sabres lineup, and given the fact he's an RFA, going to be looking for a longer-term deal, probably around $5 million, that's too much money for the Sabres, and that he'd be quite surprised, he said, if he plays next year, if he's not traded this offseason. So Brandon Montour is a player we've talked about before who they gave up a first-round pick for. Now, they may not be able to get that much of a return now, but there's still enough value there that they can get something hopefully close to that and recoup their losses here and kind of move on. I don't really know if that turned out to be a great trade for the Sabres longer term. They traded a first-rounder and Brendan Gooley for Montour, and I still think he's a good defenseman. He just did not fit in their system well, and things just did not work out, and now they're looking to move on here. Like I said, it's going to be one of those deals that looked good at the time, but then didn't work out. Now they're going to have to cut their losses and move on. I mean, it could end up being a guy like Colin Miller moved as well, but when you have other defensemen like Rasmus Dahlin, Henry Yokoharu, Ristolainen's probably staying, it just doesn't make sense to be paying Montour that kind of money to play that down in your lineup. So I guess we'll see where we go, but Brandon Montour possibly could be used as trade bait to find themselves that center iceman, which could hopefully balance out their top 6 and help Jeff Skinner be more productive. So let me know your thoughts on who they should target for that center. Where would be a good fit for Montour? Give me your trade options in the comments and we can discuss further. Now lastly here, I want to take a look at the Edmonton Oilers. There's a very interesting article that came out talking about Jesse Puljujarvi and some recent interviews he conducted where he's saying he might actually return to Edmonton after all. I mean, he's a player that's been swirled in trade rumors really ever since before last season and back to last summer when he basically made it clear he wasn't going to sign. He's an RFA and he did not want to return to Edmonton, did not like the situation there, kind of felt that it hurt his growth and development and opted to go back and play in Europe rather than sign and while he waited out a trade. Well, it seems to be like he's really changing his tune here. I'm going to give you some snippets on the screen from this article. It basically goes on to say, you can never say, no, I have grown and I see things a little differently. There is a new GM and a new coach building a winning team at Edmonton, and it may be possible that I'll still be playing there. And he also goes on to say about his recent conference call with GM Ken Holland and head coach Dave Tippett that it was a good and constructive call and that the call left him with a very positive overall picture. So that is clearly changing his tune, and it's something that many of us have been saying all along, that we were very surprised that even though things didn't go well in Edmonton, given the fact they had a complete regime change, new GM, new coach, new everything, you would have think he would have given it a little bit longer and more of a chance before he opted to not sign and head to Europe. Although, you know what, I think going to Europe might have been the best thing for him anyway. He played well over there. He's gained his confidence back. They still haven't traded him, so obviously they don't want to part with him for next to nothing, or if the value wasn't there based on what they were getting offers on, and it made sense for them to hang on to him. And now it looks as though they might have finally kind of smoothed things over. And at the same time, though, you got to wonder if he's looking at the success of the team and saying, geez, you know what, maybe these guys are good for this team. Maybe I should give them more of a chance, because obviously a few years ago we saw the Oilers make the playoffs, go into the second round. Things were really on the up and up. Things were getting better. We thought they were building towards being a contender, and then things really fell off. Last year was really bad for the Oilers, and things were just going in a poor direction. They needed to get a fresh start. They didn't, instead of taking the steps forward, they took some big-time steps backwards, and it just wasn't going well. But now, as we can see, the moves that GM Ken Holland has made with a new head coaching style of Dave Tippett have certainly improved things enough that the Oilers are once again, a stronger team, certainly a playoff contender for sure. Of course, they have to go in and have this playoff series coming up here soon, the Chicago Blackhawks, but certainly most of us feel that they should be able to beat them and move on to the round of 16, and the Oilers are certainly in a position where they could be primed for a potential playoff run. I still think they're missing a few things to really be a serious cup contender, although you never know. This is the year that anybody can win. I really honestly believe that, but Jesse Puljujarvi could very well be looking at this saying, geez, things are looking much better there. Maybe I should give it a chance. Can you imagine if you look at the right side where he would normally play, your top two right wingers are Kassian and Yamamoto. Well, Zach Kassian, to me, he fits that role. He's done okay in those top two lines, but I don't think he's a guaranteed fixture to remain there for long term. I think a guy like Puljujarvi could possibly jump in there. Certainly room in the third and fourth lines that he could come in as well, and I can see where he would fit in there and actually be able to play and do better. So we'll see what happens with Jesse Puljujarvi, but now he seems to be changing his tune, having more constructive calls and talks with the Oilers brass. I do think there's a pretty good chance, after all, that he actually stay, work things out. I would not be shocked to see him in an Oilers uniform next season. So let me know your thoughts. Do you think they should hang on to him and give him a chance? Do you think he kind of just sees the success of the team and that's what's kind of causing him to change his opinion here? Let me know your thoughts and we'll discuss further in the comment section. If you're new to the channel, consider subscribing and turning on your notifications so you don't miss any future content, and give this video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it. I'd appreciate it if you did. As always, thank you for watching, and I'll catch you next time.